Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a great day and welcome to everything you need to know about the most recent PvP update. The most recent PvP update involves a lot of things. If you read the title, looked at the thumbnail, you'll probably see Enfeeble and Shatter, but that's not the only thing we're going to cover. If you guys are unaware about what this update was, basically they redid a lot of qualifications for PvP when it came to some item cards, and they also just remade some actual treasure cards that used to be banned in PvP. Let's start with what I think is going to be the biggest thing, and it's really going to change up the meta. It's the Enfeeble Shatter update. So if you look in my TCs, you may or may not notice something that you wouldn't expect up either. There are now Enfeebles that are very interesting in the sense that they're 2 pips. The previous TC used to be 2 pips, but the actual spell is not 2 pips, it's 3 pips. And instead of the infinite effect that a regular Enfeeble might have, what it does is it removes 3 positive charm. Now, it's a no-brainer. The best time to use this is when your opponent has 3 blades that are not ageist, maybe 2, because technically you only need 2 rounds to gain the pips to do this. What I do find very interesting about this is that it's not 3 hanging effects that are removed. So what does that mean? That means that let's say that you were to blade 3 times, and before your opponent can Enfeeble, maybe you put up a Spirit Blade. This Enfeeble is only going to affect that Spirit Blade. It's not going to affect those other 3 blades. Throw in a few Aegises here and there, you start to notice a thing where this is not as good as an infinite removal whatsoever. It actually is just a card that you can use very situationally, especially when your opponent's being sloppy about the way they blade. Now, the other thing that I think is a little bit more controversial, believe it or not, is that there are now 2-pip shatters that remove 3 positive buffs. Now, this is a much bigger deal because, 1, it's not a 3-pip shatter, it's 2 pips, and very few people who ever run strategies that trap stack into the shatter, which is what shatter really is used for, they trap stack. When they do that, they're not running Myth Mastery, so the fact that it's a 2-pip shatter is a really, really big deal. And what I'm very, very concerned about is that there are a couple of schools where 2-pip shatters can actually be very, very good. Like, if let's say you're a fire, let's say you're a myth, right? Those 2 schools. If someone does 2 different set shields against you, and what I mean by set shields is one of these, right? Or one of these, maybe, right? 2 volcanic shields to prevent a trap stacking strategy. The way the order of this works is that it'll remove a fire shield, it'll remove a storm shield, and then it'll remove a fire shield if you have 2 volcanics on. And then if, let's say it's a legend shield, right? It'll remove a myth shield, it'll remove a death shield, and then it'll remove a myth shield. What that means is that fire and myth can trap stack better than ever now, especially myth. Myth can literally just take off 2 legend shields with 2 pips, and it used to be that you had to King Art to do it. So really, if myths can get their hand on this, just 1 mythic field became a lot more powerful. So there are definitely strategies that involve traps that are way better with Shatter. I'll be honest, personally, I'm a much bigger fan of the Enfeeble than I am of the Shatter. I think trap stacking just became a lot easier with this, although blade stacking became a lot harder with this. So I guess it's a give and take. I feel like one strategy you'll see a lot more now than the other one. I do think they need to introduce a spell that's similar to this, except with traps that every other school can have, or they got to do something where schools just have a way to counter traps. I don't know where the direction of Wiz is going with those, but I do think there needs to be some counter to people who just trap into the trap, just like there is now somewhat of a counter to people who blade into the blade. What I will say about the Enfeeble change that I really, really like is that if you can Enfeeble a bunch of blades off of a myth or a fire, you might not see wards come out as much. I think one of the reasons why ward is so common in this meta, especially before this update, is because there's no real counter to a myth or a fire that blade twice and then either do a King Art overtime combo or an Inferno Salamander overtime combo into a Shad. It's really, really hard to counter that unless you have some sort of way to remove blades and also weakness at the same time. Like, this is actually, I think, a really, really good change. But that's PvP. Let's talk about PvE and what I find very interesting and that could actually make this not so intrusive a change for PvE. Now, when you notice the examples I've given you, right? There's a Shatter TC that, you know, removes 3 positives. There's an Enfeeble TC that removes 3 positives. But there's also versions of Enfeeble that remove all positive buffs still, but those ones are not allowed in PvP. It's the same with Shatter, I assume. So what that means is that there are certain bosses like Omen, which I've heard a lot of people talking about. Like, there's schools that actually need things like TC Enfeebles and TC Shatters that can remove a lot of things, and that's the only real way to beat bosses that are super, super OP. Now, my honest opinion of this is that it's a chicken and egg problem. Like, I think the need for Enfeebles and Shatters are because the developers have put out bosses that still need to be challenging as new updates come out, that are challenging despite having Enfeeble and Shatter. And I think the concept of infinite removal becomes really important when we're talking about PvE. Because, you know, like, I know I'm not the only one. You know, when you're, like, fighting a mob that's myth and you blade up and you get Earthquake, it's ridiculous that for 6 pips, the whole game resets. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. So, as equally ridiculous as a mob Earthquaking you, I think it is kind of ridiculous to need to do infinite removal of any sort to beat a boss. I think they should make bosses that are challenging and also kind of run away from the whole infinite removal thing. I just think that bosses aren't really that hard right now. And I think if they are challenging, they should be challenging for the right reasons, not because you can't do something infinitely. So who knows? If these copies of Enfeeble and Shatter are just as readily available as other copies of Enfeeble and Shatter, the ones that remove 3 things, then this isn't gonna affect PvE that much. But if it does, then what I hope that means is that bosses are gonna be more realistic, and they're geared towards people that don't have infinite removal tools, and maybe they'll be more fun and creative as a result of that. Now, there are other changes, and I know I mentioned these at the beginning of the video, but I think these are very interesting, especially because it demonstrates something that I don't think we've seen a lot, which is that KingsIsle is doing stuff that actually helps low-level PvP a little bit. There are a lot of pets that give a lot of item cards that do quite a bit of damage that seems a little unjustified. There's a lot of examples of this. One example is Vengeful Seraph. This is a spell that I've used many, many times, don't get me wrong, but for 135 damage per pip, at low levels, this gets absolutely insane, especially when resist isn't around the 50 to 60 mark. Another pet, and this is something I literally made a video on a week ago, the Royal Triton, right? It does 1200 to 1280 damage for 6 pips. At low level, where there are no shads, this is a free shad. Like, these kind of spells get crazy. Now, the other 2 spells that got affected by this change were Arctic Zilla, so any pets that give Arctic Zilla are now, you know, that card is now no PvP. And the other card that got made no PvP is Frost Minotaur, which is a spell that did, like, I think 700 damage out of a smaller hit like a Minotaur would do, and it was only available through boots. This was taking over, I want to say, level 90 to level 99 PvP like crazy. There was a bunch of Ice Wizards that would just blade 3 times, Frost Minotaur, and it was so good at that level that it would always win you the game. So when you're a higher level, those kinds of changes seem a little ridiculous, but and honestly, I'm kind of annoyed at the Royal Triton change specifically, because I literally just made a bunch of Triton pets. But it is cool that they are looking at balancing low-level PvP. So again, it might be an inconvenience for higher levels, but I think it could do more good for PvP than harm. The one other change they made, and this one is, in my opinion, the craziest one, they made 3-pip reshuffles no PvP. This is the one that I don't get. I'm gonna be honest. I feel like, okay, I could make some issues around the whole, you know, like Shatter makes trap stacking a little bit better. Triton, it wasn't as needed, maybe not. Like, I have some criticisms here and there. This is the one that I have the most, because I kind of just don't get it. Like, I understand that small decks can just blade into the blade and then 2-pip Shatter into the reshuffle and then 2-pip Shatter again. I get that that's a cause for concern, but you really can't cycle fast on a lot of schools now to even counter those strats anymore, because you can't reliably pull a reshuffle from your side deck once you're done. What do I mean by this, right? Let's say someone does happen to blade like 4 times. All right, let's say someone does trap 5 times or something, right? Sometimes that means in order to survive, because people have such a small deck and such ease at putting out all these buffs, you need to discard whole hands in order to get your deck together. You need your shields. You might need to pull an Enfeeble TC. You might need weaknesses. You might need debuffs. You might need a minion to help you. So in those circumstances, what you would want is to hopefully cycle like crazy to counter the first big hit and then reshuffle and then play the game at your pace. What's happening now is that now you can't really do that. You could cycle so hard and completely counter someone, but because it took you so long to counter that person with all those cards, now you won't win because they're out of cards by then. Meanwhile, someone with a super small deck can just train regular reshuffle, right? All it takes is a training point. The 4-pip one is fine, right? Like, it's totally allowed in PvP. So I actually think that this change is the worst one out of all of them. Like, I understand why, especially because there are item cards. I just don't think this was the way to go about it. I don't know. Maybe if there's a way to make certain spells that are too powerful, maybe make it so that they cannot be reshuffled, like a 2-pip Shatter from that pet. Make it a one-time use so you cannot reshuffle it back. I think that's a much better case by case. You could do it. That's way better than getting rid of this, because I feel like reshuffle, especially when it comes to certain strats like slow schools against slow schools, this is actually a very strategic move, and now it just became 1-pip costlier and much harder to pull because you have to do it from your main deck. My favorite part of this is the Enfeeble. I gotta be honest. I think that this was needed. I really, really do. I'm not trying to say that just because someone does a certain strat that they're like, you know, bad or anything. I just think that there's so little repercussions to running a small deck full of blades and just going for the one shot as fast as possible, that adding even a small counter like this, it's good. I'm gonna upload a video with this card and you'll see what I'm talking about. I used this many times in the match that you'll see tomorrow, and it was still a super close game. In fact, I'm not gonna spoil it, but it was as close as you could possibly get. You'll see that in tomorrow's video. But just off of using it and having experienced it, I don't think this is a bad thing for PvP. I think it's a very, very good thing. You can still blade twice, and this would be a pretty bad move if your opponent does it. So it's not, it's more for people who blade like 3 to 4 times that you're really punishing. That's my opinion of it. As always, I'd love to hear y'all's opinions. One thing that I really want to know in the comments, have y'all had any luck farming for these? Because I hope that people have access to them, you know, man? I've heard that the Nameless Knight, for example, drops Enfeeble TC's a lot. I think they increase the loot, the drop rate of the loot, so you will get Enfeebles more often. But I'm curious about the difference in the drop rates of the infinite removal Enfeebles and the infinite removal Shatters compared to the non-infinite ones. So I definitely have a lot of questions about this, but let me know what you guys think about this update. What do you guys think about the spells that do a ton of damage being taken out of PvP, the Enfeeble and the Shatter, the reshuffle chain? I would love to hear all of y'all's comments. As always, drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and if somebody has not told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. So stay awesome. Let me know what y'all think of the update in the comments. And yeah.